Hello, this is Anne DeGheest. This is November the 6th, 2020, and this is the Anne Insights channels regarding the two COVID updates videos you're going to be watching, I hope. The first one is on epidemiology, which is record-breaking this week. We are passing around 50 million people worldwide, 10 million people in the US, and the US now has passed over 120,000 cases per day. We're going to be looking at the Spanish flu lessons that we have learned, especially looking at what's happening in Europe, which is having a massive second wave, which may be predictive of what may happen in the US. The second video is going to be focusing on what you can do to decrease your infection risk. That means boosting your immune system. What are the protection you can do to basically have the right mask, how to maintain this mask, how to use them right, what you should be aware about the environment, ventilation, humidity and all of that. What can you do to decrease your chance of getting infected in the situation where the virus is everywhere? We could also talk about the fact that the PCR may not be reliable for the first 3 days, and also how long the antibodies are lasting. So please stay safe, and if you like this video, post them. We really need to reach out to as many Americans and people around the world to stop this virus who can be so devastating. Stay safe. Hello, this is Anne DeGheest. This is the November 6th clinical video. Lots to talk about this week. If you haven't seen my virus epidemiology one, please take a look at there because we're breaking all the records and there's a lot of good insights we're learning from what's happening in Europe. On this video, I'm going to basically discuss and review all the information we have of if you get exposed, which all of us will be exposed because the virus is everywhere, what can you do to decrease your chance for you to get a serious infection? So, and also some interesting news on false negative PCR, which is things you need to be aware of, and also new information about how long the antibody lasts and some update on some of the treatment there. So hang in there. It's a very important video. Help me spread the word and post it to your social media. So some new information on the long COVID. The long COVID, for people who haven't seen my videos before, are the survivors, regardless of age and regardless of severity of the first acute attack, so the mild and medium people, who are having still problems 3 to 4 weeks after they've had the infection. So there's a study from King's College and Mass Generals on 4 million people. And these are 4 million people there who got mild and very, very low level of symptoms there. And 13% of those have symptoms after 3 weeks. The majority have what's called chronic fatigue and headaches. A lot of them haven't recovered their sense of smell. Some of them could have what's called delirium. There's a lot of confusion there. There is damage in the lungs that you can see using imaging, damage in the heart we can see using biomarkers and other type of imaging. And then there is a significant percent, unfortunately 4% of people have significant brain and cognitive function loss and kidney damage. This is the interesting graphic here where you can see that clearly as you get exposed from the disease, you're having the symptoms there and then they topically drop after 2 weeks. And this is the thing that we're keeping an eye on, is long COVID, which is a significant percent of the population there. You can see at this stage, it's still a good 30% and it drops to 10%. And we have had data, we have explained in prior videos, showing in certain cases, it's 25 to 30% of people, that's what the CDC said, have these long-term symptoms. So can we predict who is at risk? And that's going to be relevant based on how you can try to protect yourself. So a study just came out claiming that it can predict up to 77% of the people who may develop long COVID. The big factor is aging. Okay, so there's clearly a relationship there just because your immune system and your body, is weaker. If you have a lot of symptoms in the first week, and that doesn't mean you're being hospitalized, but you have a temperature, you have shortness of breath, you have maybe a drop in oxygen a little bit there, and you're having all these other symptoms that we've discussed in the past. If you have 5 of them, it's a predictor that your body is having a hard time dealing with this infection, it's spreading, you may have long-term damage. Being obese, having a BMI over 27.5, in fact, it's even slightly below obese, it's overweight, is a 10% explanation there. So we always know that being overweight is a significant risk with this disease. Having a hoarse voice, where you're having, you lost your voice there, which, some of us have had in bronchitis, shortness of breath, and being a female, there's a slightly higher chance to being a female there. So really, this is really interesting because if you are into any of these categories and you see anything happen to you with any of the symptoms, you need to be much more proactive in some of the things we're going to discuss. So what are the treatment? This is really interesting. They did a study on 1,600 patients there who had been self-described as long COVID there. And these are the type of supplements that they all have reported has made a difference. And guess what? They are the same supplements that I have mentioned in the past you should be taking now to decrease your reaction when you get infected. We're going to go back over that. It's exactly the same list, which is really interesting. Um, one of the worries is that this long COVID seems to be very similar to what's called myalgic encephalomyelitis, which is a chronic fatigue syndrome there. And unfortunately, there's no treatment for that. So it's really important that, there is no treatment for COVID. There's no treatment for long-term COVID. You have to do everything you can to basically build up your immune system and do some protection so that if you get exposed, you have a low viral load and your body can handle it, okay? That's kind of my big key point here. What are the infection risk metrics? They're starting to come out with some very interesting study. Clearly, if you're 80 years old, you have 1,000 times higher mortality risk than 20 years old. Okay, we knew that. If you have a higher chance of being infected at home, and it's 10 times higher than the hospitals and 100 times higher than public transportation. So the area where people are getting infected is at home. Okay, so we'll talk a bit more about that. And of course, men, you have twice the mortality rate than the women there. So they have done a very interesting study that shows that if you have influenza at the same time that you get exposed to COVID, you have a high replication rate. And one of the physicians told me it could be up to 10,000 times more. So it's a significant number. When I look at the paper, I didn't see that number. But as a result of that, you get more fibrosis and more lung damage. So please take your vaccine shot for the flu because you don't want to get influenza and be exposed to COVID. On top of that, it boosts your immune system there. This is a beautiful picture of this nasty virus. Some good news. I've been trying to harvest good news. So in Germany, they did a research that just got published a few days ago. And they invited 1,400 people in large indoor concert gathering. And they experiment with different scenarios to see what the infection rate is. And what they showed is that if you ask people to wear a mask, do some light social distancing, and you decrease the attendance so that there's more space between people there, and this is underlined there, the infection rate in that community is less than 50 cases per 100,000. It is not a massive outbreak. It's pretty safe, okay? They say the next level, if you have a higher outbreak in the area, is to have a assigned seat and just have more control on where people are so they're not just moving around there. But, they say it's much safer than to have a big wedding. So it's kind of controlling the space. So the hope that they're trying to do in Germany, and Germany is really good at doing this type of studies, is that if I have adequate ventilation system, so a better ventilation system if you're outdoor, if you have multiple entrants, so you don't have a lot of people going for hallways and stuff like that, and you force everybody to get mask wearing, and you kind of force the seats so people don't move around too much, you can have a safe, high attendance environment as long as the infection rate in that area there is under control. Okay, so that's some good news, which means as we are reopening and we don't want to be in a lockdown. We want to have a way to be safe and doing different type of measures based on the environment we're in. Another study from Tennessee is Wisconsin. They tried to do some contact tracing. And what they identified, they had one person that got sick in the household. And when they looked to say, how much time did it take for the rest of the household to be sick? And what was the percent of the household that got sick? And what they show is that there was a 53% infection rate within 5 days of the rest of the house. And less than 12 years old was the same number on the average, 53. The 12 to 17-year-old was a bit lower, so they seem to be a little bit more resistant there. And only 36%, so that means 2/3 of them were asymptomatic. And so the big point that came out of that study is that within 5 days, 75% of the people got infected. And that's going to be critical because I'm going to show you some very interesting data on PCR. It means that anybody who thinks they got exposed need to isolate themselves right away. Don't wait for symptoms. Don't wait for a PCR test. Because you have to protect the rest of the household. This virus spread very, very quickly within your household there. And then when they did the testing there, only 40% of this index patient, which is the person that brought the infection, had been PCR tested. So if anybody in your household thinks they've been exposed, you have to take immediate step to basically protect the rest of the house. So let's look at the risk of infection. So if a person is infected there, within 1 meter, you have susceptibility there. And the more distance you have, you can see most of the droplets goes to the floor, and then you have to deal with the aerosol. So we're going to spend a bit of time on that. This is my formula. So any disclaimer, I'm not a doctor. But basically, to keep it simple, is that your chance of getting sick is a function of the amount of viral load you're going to be exposed, and we'll spend a bit more time understanding that, multiplied by the time of exposure. And there's a magic rule of 15 minutes, but it's not a one-time 15 minutes, it's cumulative 15 minutes, so multiple time of exposure, the type of external protection you're wearing to protect yourself, and how good your immune system is in responding when they basically go through your nose or your eyes into the body there. Keep in mind that over 80% of infection are due to super spreading events. So, so what do we know so far? There's an environmental risk. Don't think that 6 feet is what you need to look for. Look at the environment that's around you. That is your risk factor. So we know that the respiratory droplets, there's a lot of those. That's the big blue things. And then you have the airborne aerosol. If you're very close to the person there, you have a high chance to get infected if you don't have a mask, because the respiratory droplet will be into your face and touch your face. The airborne is the thing that could stay in the air depending of the humidity. If it's an humidity that's very low, it could stay a long time because the molecule is so small. We now have learned in the last several months that the surface contamination is a low probability. You could still get infected, but we all worry about, do we have to wash our groceries? Do we have to disinfect our packing and all of that? And the data is coming, it's a very low risk of infection there, but still, be cautious there. We know that indoor is significantly higher risk than outdoor. In outdoor, you have the sun, that's a fantastic disinfectant, and also you have air dilution really, really fast. Anything that has poor ventilation, and we'll spend quite a bit of time this week on ventilation there, is putting you at risk. So AC is not your friend. If you're in close distance, low humidity, we talk about that, it shrinks the particles there, so they stay in the air a longer period of time. And then it's a function of the local prevalence. And I'm going to post this on YouTube. There's an interesting website there where you can calculate where you live and what's your risk of doing certain type of activities, okay? And so to give you an idea, if you're inside the Bay Area, the same amount of meeting 10 people there for 2 hours for barbecue outdoor versus doing this in North Dakota. And in one case, I have a 2% chance of being infected. The other one, it's 100%. And so it's kind of a fun way to kind of talk to the kids and kind of discuss this. So let's talk about the viral load. It's a very important concept. This is not just one particle you get and that's it, you're toast, you get sick. It's the amount of particle load you get exposed to. It's like the amount of alcohol you get exposed to, you get different reactions there. And we know that anybody who coughs, sings, scream, or shout has a significant high amount of particles coming at you as opposed to speaking and breathing. And we'll spend a bit more time on that. If the other people are not wearing masks, you are exposed. It doesn't matter if they're 6 feet away. This thing can go 20 feet, depending on the environment. And remember, this is very important. You are the most contagious when you are pre or asymptomatic. The person doesn't know they're sick. That's when you're the most infections. And the CDC has revised the guideline to say it's not a 15 minutes time slot, it's cumulative exposure. So if you see somebody in the house for 15 minutes, which is easy to do, that's your 15 minutes, okay? And majority, therefore, of infection are from family members or coworkers. It's not passing into the street when a runner is going the other way and coughing. So the first thing we need to do is to boost the immune system. I spent quite a bit of time this on October 23rd, so I'll go very quickly there. But there's more and more data showing vitamin D, vitamin C, multivitamin B, and lactoferrin will protect you when you get exposed to the virus. It kind of increases the barriers for the virus, and you help the immune system find that innate immune system there when you get that first exposure. That first exposure there is critical there, because if you can stop before it gets into the bloodstream and duplicate itself to hell, you can go from just being exposed to being sick. And then we talked in 2 weeks ago about how sleeping and melatonin has an impact in improving the immune system there. Now, if you sleep well, don't take it there, and omega-3 turn off inflammation there. So it's not that the more the body is inflamed, which is why I think obesity is a factor in severity, is because your system is running under attack by an inflammation you have from other pre-existing conditions. Vitamin D, a new study came out, one after another. So vitamin D is the surest thing right now. And basically what they show is that 80%, 82% of the COVID patient had vitamin D deficiencies. So I repeat that. It was a study done in a hospital in Spain. So these are people who got admitted into the hospital. So they were the severe patient there. 82% of these patients there had a deficiency into vitamin D. There's no relationship between vitamin D and severity. It's just help your immune system at the beginning there, when you have that first line of defense of the innate immune system, to fight off that exposure you're having from the virus. I just put this again there. This is Eastern Virginia Medical School. If you go back to my video 2 weeks ago, there's much more information there. But for prophylaxis, they have kind of the same thing we talked about. If you have mild symptoms and you're staying at home, the only thing they add is some aspirin there to basically fling the blood for the risk of blood clots that we've discussed in the past. So how do you catch COVID and what can you do? So now you've boosted the immune system, so you have kind of better immune system. What can you do to not have a higher viral load? More and more information is coming out that contaminated surface may not be too much of a worry, except for high traffic area like doorknob, elevators, area there where a lot of people are touching it. And clearly being outdoor, as much as you can. Unfortunately, we're getting into the winter. So the high risk is the viral load multiplied by the time and the frequency. So the time exposure is that 15 minutes cumulative. It doesn't take that much time. There's been a study that showed it takes less than 10 minutes from the time you touch your nose for the virus to be in your bloodstream. So, so what we need to do is we're going to talk about how can you protect yourself. Now we boost the immune system. How can you build that external defense system? And the mask is the distance and the ventilation are your three big areas to work on. Let's look about the respiratory droplet. These are the big particles that basically go in that first 6 feet distance there. And if you touch your eye, your nose, and your mouth, that's the point of entry into the body there. And remember that every shoe that you go into a store and all of that has a high risk to be contaminated. So when you get home, disinfect your shoes or leave them outside and have a pair of shoes to go on the inside, because most of the surface on the floor is where the droplets basically drop. The aerosol is the thing that has come out in the last 3 months, and the CDC took a while, but they finally accepted that it is a big problem. These are it's like a smoking. When you're smoking, it stays in the air. These are these tiny, tiny particles there that you can inhale. And when they have done studies in low humidity, like in Arizona there, it's so tiny there, it floats. It has pretty much no weight. So what can you do? This is a very important concept. This is when you get infected, and it can take up to 3 days, 3 to 5 days to get the symptoms. It turns out that when you're the most contagious is during that time period where you don't know you have it. So I repeat that. The period where the most contagious is the period where you're pre-symptomatic or asymptomatic, in the first 3 days after exposure there. So we're going to talk a bit more about that. So the viral load is the amount of quantity of virus you get exposed to. And what they have shown, when they did study on people who have been hospitalized, and they were able to use a PCR test, and they could really quantify the amount of viral load you had, is that the amount of copies were 5.6 copies per milliliter. That was kind of this. And there was no relationship between a high viral load and mortality, but it had a relationship with your chance to go from mild to severe. So here's the bad news. I feel like I'm a doomsday person today. So remember when I said that the time you're the most contagious is the first 3 days? Guess what happens? If you do a PCR during these first 4 days, you have a very high chance you have a false negative. Because although you're contagious, the amount of viral particles that's in your body there, is not necessarily detectable. In fact, if you know you got exposed and you get yourself tested the next day, you have a 100% chance of having a false negative. At day 4, you have a 67% chance of a false negative, which is the majority of the times, 2/3 of the time there. And so pretty much on the average, the first 30 days you have, it is not reliable to rely on a PCR to know if you have been infected. And keep in mind, that's what I'm saying. If anybody in your household has been exposed, you have to take some distance tests, because that's the time that you're the most contagious. And we saw in that prior study that 56% of the time, or up to 75%, you get infected in the first 4 to 5 days. And that's the problem with this virus, is that we don't know we are contagious, we pass it on. And by the time we get our test, by the time I decide I have symptoms, I have a symptom the next day, I call my doctor, I get tested. Oh, I'm not positive. Look at that. I'm right here. The damn thing has not taken over my body. So you cannot rely on a negative PCR to know that you're not contagious is the key point of this slide. So the next question was to say, well, assuming I have a negative test, what's the probability 8 days later, if I still have weird symptoms, that I'm positive? Well, it depends on what's called the attack rate, which is the incidence rate in your area. So if 1.2% of the population, is going around infected there, you have a low probability, that you can get it. If on the other hand, you have a 14%, if it's a high local attack rate there, that you could be positive 8 days later. So if you're having symptoms and you took your PCR test very shortly after you think you have been exposed there, do not assume you don't have the disease. Continue to ask for another test within 5 to 6 days, and then take proactive steps to protect the rest of your family because you're still contagious. So good news, we have new tests coming down the pipeline. They're not approved yet, but I want to give you some names so you can keep track of you. I know some of you are in the healthcare field. Ilium, which is a US company there, is doing a point of care test that, hopefully they're developing also for the home. The idea is to get a 15 minutes quick turnaround there on antigen. Antigen is not PCR. Antigen is showing that your body is fighting the infection. And it's a nasal swab. Luminostic is doing another one there with a nasal swab there. It's a turnaround. And Quanterix is developing a test for the lab. So you still have to ship it to the lab with saliva and then bring it back. So it's still 24 to 48 hours. And then there's a new technology for RNA detection there. You can see there's 3 companies there. And that's kind of a type of PCR. So, a bit more accurate there. And the idea there is to be able to use an iPhone and getting a results at home. So that's the type of test we desperately need. They're not approved yet. They're in the pipelines there. I want to give you the heads up. There's an initiative done by the NIH who is spending hundreds of millions of dollars giving grants to all these companies to develop this stuff. So if you want to follow that space, it's called RADX, which stands for Rapid Acceleration of Diagnostics. So that's one of the good initiatives that the NIH is doing. So another very interesting data set is, can we use coughing and AI to analyze if you have COVID? And so they're claiming a 97% accuracy rate on asymptomatic patient. And that could be really great because, we're looking for this type of population triage and maybe work environments where you could basically look at people to say, are you at risk to be exposed or not? So I just put this one there because we need some smart things to come down our pipeline. I want to spend a bit more time on the aerosol and to give you some knowledge there. So the formide is what goes on the surface there. And that's the one that we discovered it doesn't last very long on the skin and the hands, although you still have a chance there, there's not been too many cases reported due to surface contamination. The droplets are like a bullet that hits your face. So if you are within 3 to 6 feet of somebody there, you will be exposed if they have no mask and you have no mask. The airborne is the one that took us a while to figure out there. As I say, it's like smoke and it disperses in the air, and there's a risk that it goes deep because there's small particles deep into your lungs. And to give you an idea, if somebody's talking, singing, and shouting, it increases the aerosol by up to 50 times. And so you should try to avoid as much as you can being indoor in crowded spaces that have poor ventilation for a long period of time with people with no mask or unfit mask. People drop their mask there below the nose. So be aware of ventilation. Open the windows. Get filters into your house if you can. I have my air filters that I use. There's portable HEPA filters and stuff like that is available on the consumer market. So let's take a look there. If somebody has a loud voice, they give you 50 times more particles. So if you look at the orange dot here, each orange dot is the amount of particle that is enough amount of viral load to get you infected. So if somebody's just sitting there breathing, after 2 minutes, 15 minutes, and 1 hour, you can see, there's a small amount of particles in the air that could get you infected. If somebody's talking, you can see how within 1 hour, your risk is really going up very, very high. And if somebody is talking very loudly there, you can see that you're pretty much toast after 1 hour. I mean, you've been exposed multiple times there. So I think, I want you to visualize this because one of these little orange dots can get you sick. That's kind of the way to visualize that. So aerosol is like a smoke cloud, and you can see that they're very tiny particle, 100 micrometers, and they can spin in the air for hours. So if you're indoor, low humidity because of heating system, which we do in the winter there, those particles will stay in the air longer. A study in Kansas showed that there were two type of counties. 81 counties decided not to, they opted out, sorry, the typo there, of the mask mandate. And then 21 counties decided to enforce a mandate. And you can see within 12 weeks, you had a big change between the yellow bar where they did the mandate and were able to control the outbreaks. And then the darker colors there where they didn't have a mandate, and you can see, they both started the same place here, and then they basically took off there. So, wearing a mask is not only safe for you, but also save your community and your loved ones. So mask wearing works. Sorry, my slides are going all over the places. The CDC is saying 40% at least is asymptomatic. If you have an N95, you can block up to 90 to 95% of the particle. And we're going to discuss a little bit there. What about the other type of mask since nobody can buy an N95? So they did some study on rodents because we can expose rodents to different level of COVID, which we cannot do on humans. And what they show is what's called the lethal dose 50, which is what they do in biotech to see what it takes to get 50% of the animals to die. And what they really show is that the higher dose given to hamster makes them more sick. Gee, surprise, but we are able to basically show this in animal control test. The other thing they show is that if you basically mask them, you drastically decrease not only the percent of people who get sick, but they get milder because they get that lower viral load I've been saying. So really what's important of the mask is not only to protect other people in front of you, but you decrease the amount of viral that you get exposed to, and that increases your chance to just have a mild case. So there's different masks. So this is a big thing I'm going to spend some time explaining it. An N95 has all these random type of fibers. A cotton mask is made on machines, and so therefore it's more structured. Why is that important? An N95 is much more effective than a surgical mask, and then a 2 to 3 layer tissue mask, than a 1 layer and a bandana, and don't really protect you too much. Why is that? Because what they try to do is that, remember, there's the droplets and the aerosol, and they're different size. So what they do by designing all these fibers this way at random is that at the beginning, they trap on the outside of your mask the large particles. They literally slam into the fibers and they get stuck there. The big problem we have is the medium-sized particle because they flow with the airflow, the same way that the smoke flows, if you're having a fan. And this is the one where you want to have this very complex roadmap so that they get stuck. And that's why the N95 is so successful there, because there is no avenues like you would have on a cotton mask for them to float around. In addition to that, you may not know that, but the N95 are energized with some type of technology there that basically attracts them and stuck them, like electrostatic, the same way that some of you filter in the furnace may be working there. So that's why the N95 is so successful, is because they have this really special weaving and special materials there that basically traps these particles as they're trying to move inside. So it's all over the places as far as the side, but this is to give you an idea. If you look at dust particle that we can see, that's like 100 micron. This is the size of this little virus there. It's so tiny you can't really see it. It's tiny, tiny. It's the level of smoke, like wildfire that we had in the Bay Area there. And this is to give you an idea, pollen. So it's like significantly bigger than pollen. So a study done by Duke University looked at 14 different masks, all the way from surgical mask to tissue, bandana, and everything else. And again, they showed that N95 is better than surgical, is better than polypropylene, is better than valve N95, better than bandana. And the worst thing is a fleece, because what the fleece does, it breaks the droplet into smaller particles, but they still go through. So they end up being aerosol, which means you get more aerosol. So don't wear a fleece. And this is the study in more details there. You can see about the amount that went through. And you can see that the fleece basically give you more aerosol than having nothing. So just a key reminder, as your kids wants to wear a fleece, that doesn't help, it makes it worse. Clearly, if you can do things like polycotton and polypropylene there, they're very good efficiency there. And I put the link there for people who want to spend more time on it. So the one thing you should not wear is an N95 or K95 with a valve. It's easier to breathe because it pushes the air out, but that means the air goes out and can contaminate people. And in fact, a lot of the airlines will ban you. They won't let you into the airplane if you're having those type of valve. The fit of the mask is critical. The study shows, how much of what you're blowing out goes through the side of the mask. And if you have a very tight leak, they can measure the difference. And there's some leak in the K95, much less than the surgical mask. And of course, the cloth, you can see them. And so the average mask may block maybe 50%, where the N95 will block 90%. And the face shield, which is that plastic thing you put in front of your body there, it does some protection there, but it's very low protection. It's only 23%. So mask care, please don't wear it below your nose. It doesn't really do anything there. Don't have something that's so small that, you're going to get a lot of air, going for the side there. So really, this is what you're looking for. So normally we should be cleaning it every day. Don't let it hang in your car. It's not a safe way because of temperature and you touching it. Try to remove without touching the surface, because the surface is contaminated. That's where the particle got stuck. So you may touch the mask, and then afterwards you remove the mask, and then you touch yourself. Both, you contaminated there. If you have a cloth mask, you should, do the laundry. It's very simple. You put maybe a tiny bit of bleach and maybe soak it for 5 minutes, or you put into a traditional laundry there. Make sure you have a dry heat, that basically can kill the virus. How do you clean the N95? Please don't push in the washing machine. That's going to be a catastrophe. So I put into the sun when it was nice and sunny, but it could degrade the media over time, but that was better than, because it's hard to get this N95. In the hospitals, they're using UVC light. Remember, if you use any of these UV portable lights, they're dangerous for your eyes. So you have to really be careful how you use them. Do not look at it. If you wash your mask, they are going to degrade. So if you start, in this case, they basically washed it 3 times, and it started degrading in its performance there. But then they added one of those filters you can buy on Amazon, which is the MERV 13 filter that you can put in between the cotton fibers there, and that drastically increase the protection level. So if you haven't done that yet, take a look at some of these masks when you can have this disposable little filter there, and you can buy a whole bunch of them for $10. So it's a 2-ply high thread count cotton there with little pockets there that you can put these filters. So ventilation system, it turns out to be critical. And there's a study there in a classroom that they do the computer stimulation there. If the air circulation, so the AC, is just above where the teacher is, this is much better, because somehow it pushes the droplets in the aerosol to the floor. If, on the other hand, it's on the other side of the room, which a lot of the classrooms are, what it happens is that it basically circulates the air. So it's everywhere, on the floor, on the walls, and everything else. So when you go into a room, or if your kids goes to school, you need to put some pressure on the school, because there are very simple things they could do to improve the airflow, especially as we get into the winter there. And this took, after 15 minutes, only 10% of the aerosol was filtered out. That means 90% of them were circulating over that 15-minute period of time. In the grocery store, they did a study there that 50% of the particles were vented out. So the grocery store were much more effective than the school. And that's because you have all these rows. And the rows basically is like a tunnel. It forces the airflow to be much more effective there. Super spreading event there, we know about the choir. I mean, you heard about this in March, when 61 out of 120 members basically got infected, even when they were 14 meters away, just because they were singing and all the particles went up in the air. There's a building in Korea there where you can see that the co-worker all infected themselves, and then there were only 3 people infected on the lower floor. So it's clearly aerosolized in the air. So in Vietnam, they did a study there where you had this infected patient there, patient 0 there, and if you had no safety procedures and all of that, pretty much everybody in that bar got sick. And that's why they're shutting down all the bars in Europe, and that's why we had this big outbreak in the Midwest there from the bars. If, on the other hand, you get people to wear masks, only mask, there's an improvement there, but there's still a lot of people getting infected. Then they improve the ventilation, and they're forcing fresh air in and opening the doors as much as they can there. And you can see not only 1 person gets infected there. Now remember, the air conditioning that we do is the reverse. We don't take a lot of air from the outside. We try to circulate the air inside the building, which means we're recirculating the air because we're trying to be power efficient there. So they did a study in a school, and after 2 hours with no safety measure, pretty much half the classroom 12 out of 24 students, so roughly half the classroom, got infected there, and they basically started wearing masks, and you can see that there was a lower amount of patients getting sick. Then they start changing the ventilation, and they opened the window there, and then they opened up the door, so there was a circulation airflow there, and you can see that only one kid got exposed if the teacher was sick. So again, I emphasize, when you go into an environment, look at the ventilation environment you're in. This is a story from China there. There was this sick person here, and the air conditioning basically recycled the air, and everybody that was in that airflow pretty much got contaminated. There was a Buddhist bus we talked about a few months ago there, because the air conditioning in a bus is an indoor air conditioning there. Boof, half of them got sick. So what we need to do to have safer restaurants and safer workplace is to get fresh air coming in. And, in the winter, we have to figure out how we deal with winter. Having a circulation of the air from the outside in with air filters, so we can capture that. And then using as much doors so that we can have good airflow, so the airflow doesn't get trapped like we show in the classroom there. So the safer workplace that people are working on is to have people alternating here. So there's at least 2 meters, 6 feet apart. So it's like a zigzag shape, having a lot of natural circulation there coming from the outside, and then trying to get people to work at home as much as possible. And this came from the Chinese CDC and a lot of European and Johns Hopkins there to say, if you want effectiveness, the best way is to get teleworking, because they don't see each other as much as possible. And mandatory use of non-medical masks gives some protection, but that's the least effective way. So we're going to deal in the next 12 months in what type of hybrid. We cannot lock down the economy. We have to do new safety precaution, new ventilation, and new different workflows. So another study showed the airplane may be safer than we thought. They did a study in a 767 and 777 aircraft with 300 different aerosol that they could measure, with some special ingredient, like fluorescent tracer. And what they show is that because the air exchange in the airplane is 3 times higher than in a store, for example, and they have these really high-grade HEPA filters there, you basically had a lower chance of being infected in the airplane than if you were spending 90 minutes in somebody's home. And so they believe that the airplanes are safer. Of course, this was done by the U.S. Transportation Command. So that's some of the things they were looking for. So let's look at antibodies, some data on antibodies. So let's assume you get infected. Are you protected for the rest of your life? No. It's pretty clear cut. Now, how long are you protected? That's a bit worrisome. There's a couple of studies just came out. So New York Mount Sinai did a study there, and they look at 30,000 patients that they screened for IgG. IgG is the symptoms that you have been exposed. That's the antibody. That's related to the viral spike of the virus there. And they did at 82 and 148 days. The good news, they showed that 90% of the patient had neutralizing antibody. So that's really good news. People develop enough antibodies. They showed that 3 months, it's pretty stable. So you're very protected for 3 months, and start declining at 5 months. And you can see that decline, that infection point at 3 months and 5 months. You still have some. The other thing they showed that was interesting is people had a milder case of the virus, took longer to build the antibodies. So the body continued to build the antibodies, but initially you have a mild case, you don't have a huge viral load. Another study just came out from Nashville. In this case, they look at healthcare workers. Now remember, healthcare workers continuously get exposed, much more than somebody in New York who just got exposed once, and then you see over time what happens to them. And what they showed is after 60 days, so 2 months, so much earlier, 42% still had antibodies. So if healthcare work continuously get re-exposed, the body is probably fighting that, and maybe the antibodies start going down. So that all the antibody decrease over time. So the one thing for sure is that people who have been exposed in March should not assume they're protected now. I repeat that. People who have been exposed in March, like in New York, who have antibodies there, have a lower amount of antibodies now, and some of them may have a level that's so low that they could be reinfected. So we need to really be careful. And that's what we need to see from Europe as they're fighting this new wave. So UK did a study there because they're very worried about that. And what they look is the prevalence in the population of people with antibodies. And what they saw in June, 6% of the population had tested antibodies, but it dropped to 4.4%, which means that people are losing their antibodies in the population there. So that was 26% drop after 3 months, which is consistent to what we're seeing with the other study. And that's critical because the vaccine, we want the vaccine to last more than 6 months if we can. And so that doesn't mean you don't have long-term immunity, because what we're measuring is a neutralizing antibody, not the T cells. And if you haven't seen my videos on immunity, T cells and B cells, please take a look, and then go take a look at it. But what we know is that the 8 to 24 years old lost antibody at a slower rate than the older ones, which is what you would expect. The older we are, the less we keep the antibodies there. And then the demographic was all over the place. So only 3.6% of the British population that were white, had tested seropositive, but up to 9.7% of the Asian population. And that's probably because a lot of them are essential workers, so they have a higher chance to be exposed. So what does that mean? A quick update on vaccine and treatment there. Again, I spent a lot of time in the last few videos there. So if you want a deep dive, go on this October 9 and October 23rd for a lot of deep dive on the vaccines. A quick update on Eli Lilly. Eli Lilly is working on a monoclonal antibody. So what they do is that they take the plasma, the blood of somebody who has recovered, then they spin it and they centrifuge it, and they get what's called the plasma there. And then they have identified a piece of that plasma that's the antibody, and they try to basically manufacture this at higher concentration there. And they did a study, and the good news, this is the first time we have heard of a therapy for mild to moderate. Everything we've discussed in the past are for people who are hospitalized or on oxygen. So that's great news, because remember, 80% of us, may end up with a mild to moderate case. So they show that they decrease the viral load. And remember what I said before, if you can decrease the viral load when you get exposed, you decrease the severity. So the good news, if this continues, this is only a phase 2, is that this has no side effects. And so therefore, the medium dose had a decrease of 3x of the viral load. Again, everything is about decreasing that viral load by boosting your immune system, which is what they're doing, or decreasing the amount of virus that gets exposed to you. And this is to give you an idea, a very clear line of the placebo versus the drug. So clearly had a big impact. And you really want to have a lower viral load during that cytokine risk that you have there at 7 to 10 days after infection. Unfortunately, the NIH came up to say, hey, there's no benefit for people in hospitalized, but there seems to be benefit for people who are mild to moderate, probably because by the time you get hospitalized, you're into that cytokine storm problem we've discussed in the past. Convalescent plasma is, again, controversial. There was a study called the PLASTID trials, which is multi-center, with 464 patients in random controlled trials. That means that people are getting a fake plasma that doesn't have the antibodies. And they show no evidence that it decreased disease severity, and no differences in neutralizing antibodies, i.e. it doesn't work. And on top of that, it has a risk of developing blood clotting, which we know is a big problem. So it aggravates the blood clotting. And as you know, the convalescent plasma, under some political pressure, has been approved under EUA by the FDA several weeks ago. So it's not a cure for death. It's the only thing we know for sure. Pfizer vaccine, I'm going to spend a little bit of time on that because I think it's interesting there. So in order to be approved by the FDA, you have to show that compared to a control group, that 50% of the people who have the vaccine do not get infected as opposed to the control group. And the definition of being able to read that first result that everybody has been waiting for is to get 32 cases in the control group of people who get sick. Now, remember, we're talking about these large trials of 30,000, 60,000 people, but because we have to wait for people to get sick, we cannot inject them with the virus for lots of ethical reasons. So what happens, Pfizer hasn't reached that 32 events so they can do the first read. That's what we've been all waiting for. They're very close to it. And I was listening to the CEO of Pfizer there, and they say maybe in November, they're going to get the reading there that they can do. Why is it important there? So if this is where we are, which is, you can see it was on November the 1st, and you're looking for that 32 events, but that's just to see if you're having a response. What we really want to see is 164 events. That's what you need to really get the final approval from the FDA. And you have to wait for that control group, then you can compare to the people vaccinated. Look at the dates here. So to show the efficacy of the vaccine, and remember, we're looking at 50% to make sure it works. That's talking September 2021. And I mentioned that because there has been a lot of hype about this vaccine, we get a vaccine, this whole thing is over, we go back to the old world. It is not the case. In order for us to know if these vaccines are effective with enough data, that's normal level that you would expect for a vaccine to be approved, and to have enough data to make sure there's no side effects, which is in the first 2-3 months after you expose people, and to make sure you're at least at 50%, we may get an EUA, and you can look, let's say, at the best case scenario there, which is over here at 50% there. It's going to be maybe at the end of the year. That's the 32 events, but that's not a lot of patients. It doesn't give you a lot of statistical confidence that it's reliable there. And then if you go into an environment there where there's a very high amount of cases in the community there, that's the 1% attack rate versus 2%, which is the way we're going right now, then you can see this curve move. But I want to give you the reality check. We're still talking May of 2021 to be confident that these are effective there. Now, there could be EUA that gets approved quickly, and we're going to give it to the healthcare workers because we need to protect the healthcare worker for the winter if these are available there. But for the general population there, this is some of the numbers we're looking at. So I want to summarize what I've said today. And again, there's more information on the October 9th, is that you need to do everything you can, because we all are going to be exposed because the virus is everywhere, to decrease your risk of getting an infection. That means decreasing the amount of viral load that gets inside your body, therefore decrease the amount of time exposure you have with somebody who's maybe infected there. Work on your external protection, which is the mask, the distance, and the environment you're in, the ventilation, and then boost the immune system. Therefore, if you do get exposed, you have a very high probability to be asymptomatic, have a mild amount of antibodies, and the more you get exposed, the stronger you get, and we all, hopefully we'll have no problems there. So, so work on your external protection, washing the mask. We talk about the mask. N95 surgical or tissue with a filter is what you should all be looking for. Wear glasses or shield. A lot of people get infected by touching their eyes. Build your immune system. Sleep, exercise. If you look at the video 2 weeks ago for the protocol from the DoD, they went into a lot of the detail of what you can do as far as exercise, stress management, and nutrition there. So please, download my PDF. There's a 2 PDF that will give you all the link and their time index. So when you click on this link, it will bring you exactly to where the video timestamp is. And you can also download this Word document there that explains all the videos and search them. So thank you for listening. Stay safe, stay healthy, and please protect yourself and your loved one. It can be controlled. We just need to realize this is here for very long winter. Please be safe, and see you in 2 weeks.